Today's session would be presented by Joe Kwon. Joe is an Associate Director with KPMG International, helping manage the KPMG privacy framework throughout the global organization. He has varied talents. He is a host of the Why It Works podcast, which reveals the hidden mechanics behind why things work, and the author of 2 leadership books, Unlock Your Charisma and Unlock Your Executive Presence. This last book is being published today. As part of this session, we are pleased to give away 5 ebooks. We will be sending an email to the winners who we choose randomly. Now, I would like to hand over the session to Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Hello, everyone. Okay, great. I have some really bad news for you. Most of us here today, and I include myself in this cohort, will not fulfill our potential. Let me say that again, in case you thought you misheard me. Most of us here today will not fulfill our potential. It's not because you're not talented. You are. It's not because you're not hardworking. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't worked your butt off to get here. And it's not because you don't have the right character or values. I know many of you, and I know you have that in spades already. The reason you will not fulfill your potential is because although you are paying attention to a lot of the right things, you are not developing one of the most important things. And that thing is your executive presence. If you forget everything you hear today, I want you to hold on to one concept, and that is your executive presence sets the ceiling for your success, right? We often talk about ceilings, career ceilings. I want to share with you that your executive presence sets the ceiling for your success. So by the end of this presentation, you will have learned what it takes to improve your executive presence and as a result, fulfill your full potential. So how are we going to do this? Let's take a look. So first we're going to go through an introduction, just make sure we're all on the same page. Then we're going to get to the nitty-gritty pretty quickly, how to generate executive presence, how to actually do it, not just talk about what it is. Then we'll talk about how do you deploy executive presence. So now you have it. How do you make the best use of it? And then we'll talk about executive presence for underrepresented professionals. So what does it mean when you're an underrepresented professional with respect to how executive presence might work for you? We'll save some time at the end for Q&A. And then that'll be the end of the official webinar. Shraddha will close us out. But we have a special treat at the very end from 1 to 1:30 for those of you who can make it. We're going to have 30 minutes of just kind of a group discussion and sharing where I'm going to invite people to share their perspectives, their insights, their reactions about executive presence. Because hopefully after hearing this, it will create some things that you would like to share with others in the group, and we really want to hear that. So to the extent that you can make it to that last part, totally optional, which was why it wasn't on the invite, we welcome you to stay for that portion. So in order for this to be an effective presentation, I want to make it concrete, right? I don't want to talk about executive presence like some concepts and, abstractions. So who is the one person or persons that immediately come to mind when you think about executive presence? So think about that and type that into the chat box. It could be someone you know. It could be someone maybe who you don't know, but you see them on TV or in films, and you're just like, wow, that person has such executive presence. Ha ha, very funny, Ting. So I see some Obamas. Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters. Nice, nice. Yep, David Turner. Yeah, I second that. Yep, definitely. Yeah. Yep. Lynn Dowdy, yeah, agree. Michelle Meyer-Shipp, for sure, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So what I think we can see is we all recognize when people have executive presence. And what I want you to do is as we go through the rest of this presentation, I want you to take that person and hold them in the back of your mind and compare what you're hearing to that person and say, wait a second, does that person have executive presence because of what we're talking about today? Because if you make that connection, then you can start to do those things or feel those things that bring executive presence. So we were not talking in the abstract anymore. So I really want you to be tough on me. I want you to say, okay, does that person have what Joe's talking about, or is it something entirely different? So first, let's set the baseline. What is executive presence? I could give you the definition, but I feel like sometimes these definitions don't really help. Let's break it down. Let's just look at the two different parts. So executive. Executive comes from the Latin root exequi, which means to carry out, right? So if you think about what is an executive, what makes someone an executive, it's you're the type of person that gets stuff done. You carry out plans. That's why people are elevated to executive status, because they have a history and an ability and a reputation of getting things done, right? So we'll keep it simple. That's an executive. Second part of the term, presence, right? Notice it says executive presence, not executive doing, right? Because a lot of times you'll look at these top 5 lists or articles about how to have more executive presence. They're constantly telling you what to do, right? But it's not what you do that makes you an executive. It's just that feeling, right? You know, you walk into a room and there's a whole bunch of people and you can just feel like, wow, that's the person who's in charge. They haven't said anything to you, right? They haven't done anything particularly special, but you know that there's a feeling, there's a presence about them. So really want to hone in on this concept. It's executive presence, not executive doing. But there's a challenge with executive presence. Let's say you have access to that person that you think has amazing executive presence. So Obama would be kind of tough, Bill Gates would be kind of tough, but let's say it's someone you know at work, maybe a boss or a coworker, and you ask them, you know, how do you generate such amazing executive presence? What do you do? What do you think they would say? Do you think they really have a good answer for you? I think a lot of times they would say stuff like, I'm just myself, right? Or I'm a really good listener. Well, I know plenty of people who listen really well. Doesn't mean I want to follow them, right? That just means, gosh, I want them to listen to me when I feel like talking, right? So that's the challenge. A lot of people with executive presence don't really know how they have it. They can't explain it. And then for those of us who want more, we think, well, they were just born with it, so there's no way I can get it, right? So that's a real problem, because if you don't understand how something is generated, you can't get more of it, right? Well, luckily, that is the first part of our presentation, which is how to generate executive presence. So the key here is in this groundbreaking definition of executive presence. So I want you to write this down. Executive presence is the ability to inspire confidence that you can lead well in a given situation. I'll say it one more time. Executive presence is the ability to inspire confidence that you can lead well in a given situation. In fact, it's so important, I want you to just say it out loud with me. Executive presence is the ability to inspire confidence that you can lead well in a given situation, right? So how do we get people to feel that way about you? That's the challenge, right? It's one thing to understand, okay, that's the way it works, but how do I get there, Joe? What is the roadmap? What are the things that, you know, need to change for me to do it? So from my research and talking to senior executives, reading all the articles I could find on executive presence and writing my book, I came up with 6 degrees of executive presence, which we'll go over now. And the 6 degrees are not things you do, they're internal states of being, right? They're the way you show up, right? So let's say you walk into a room and someone's really happy and you feel that. They haven't necessarily said anything to you, but you can just kind of feel the happiness just emanating off of them. And the opposite is true too, right? You walk into a room, the person's not crying, but they just look really sad. Like you can just feel it, right? You can feel that in everything that comes off of them, like in waves. So these are 6 states of being that almost spell out presence, not a coincidence, that leaders have that make people inspired, that like, wow, you can really lead. So the first one, the P, is proactive, right? So what does it mean to be proactive? Proactive means acting in anticipation of future problems, needs, or changes, right? So you're anticipating, you're not waiting for the thing to happen. And why does that make you, seem like someone who can really lead? Well, it's because it's like you can see around corners, right? You're not just waiting for something to happen. You have this experience and you're doing the things not to prevent bad things from happening, because we can't control the way the universe unfolds, but to position yourself in the best way you can to deal with what's likely to happen in the future. And that's the type of person that people want to follow, right? That's the person people want to put in charge to do something, not someone who, after something happens, they're like, well, what should we do now? I had no idea this was going to happen, right? There's a great quote. Instead of the situation dictating our decisions, we dictated the situation. Instead of the situation dictating our decisions, we dictated the situation. If you'd like to take a guess in the chat box as to who said that, whoever guesses right for a couple questions I'll ask, I'm going to try to make it a little fun. Honor code, like at UVA, you can't look it up, don't use the search engine, but if you want to take a guess as to who wrote that, please put it in there. So I'll give you some clues. This is a military guy, ex-military, has a leadership consulting business, shows up on Joe Rogan's podcast quite a bit, former Navy SEAL. Any guesses? Okay. So his name, Colin Powell, good guess, good guess. His name starts with a J, initials JW. The Dichotomy of Leadership is one of his books. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Okay, so I'll just show you who it is. It's Jocko Willink. He's a former Navy SEAL team leader, has some great leadership material out there. And this is something that the way they express it in the Navy SEALs. So instead of the situation dictating what they do, they dictate the situation. They are proactive, all right? The next state of being of the 6 degrees of executive presence is being resolute. So now you know what you're supposed to do, but do you stick with it, right? It's not about being stubborn, but it's about not flipping just because it's unpopular or someone questions it. As long as you feel it's the right decision, you keep going, right? And a good example of this, and this one should be a little bit easier to guess, who is the movie character or actor that says this? He is not human. He's like a piece of iron, right? Anyone know what character says that? He's very tall, very Swedish. Yes! Who is that? Nestor. Can someone jot a note that Nestor got that? Yeah, yeah. Drago from Rocky IV, right? Because Rocky is just, it's ridiculous. He's getting punched in the face, punched in the body. This guy's taking steroids all day long, and he still can't put Rocky down. He's resolute, that determination. And that's what people look for in leaders, right? They look for people who are going to bring it across the line, even if there's resistance, right? Great. So next, the E is for equanimity, right? So equanimity is just a fancy way of saying, you stay cool and even under stress, right? You're cool under pressure. So why is that important? I like to use the analogy of water, and anyone in the audience, like a lifeguard or go boating a lot, really likes the water. Let's imagine someone's drowning. There's a disaster, the boat capsized, everyone's drowning. You're a very strong swimmer, and you go to save someone, right? Are you freaking out too when you go to save someone who's drowning, or are you sort of calm, right? It's a horrible situation, right? Boat's flipped over. But if you're calm, it allows other people to be calm, and they almost like hold on to you like a buoy. I can never say that word right, buoy. And it stabilizes everyone else. So that is also really important, and what people recognize in leaders. Everyone else is running away, freaking out, losing their mind. This one person, they can still stay even and think clearly about what they need to do. So when you bring that state of being of equanimity, it also inspires people to think like, maybe we should put this person in charge. They seem to know something that other people don't. The next state of being, the S, is stillness, right? And stillness is kind of on the opposite spectrum of proactive. So some people might be like, well, Joe, you said be proactive, and now you're telling me to be still. You're contradicting yourself. The stillness, what that means is not total inaction. It means you are still until you need to act, right? So the things that you do when you are proactive are more powerful, right? So I'll give you an example. You already know this in life. Go up to someone that you're friendly with, your family or someone close, and try this with them. Say, oh my gosh, the most amazing thing happened to me, and just stop talking for like 5 seconds, right? 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, and then finish your sentence, right? Think about how much more powerful the end of that sentence is than if you were just like, something almost amazing happened to me, blah, 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 blah. You just keep going and you don't give a chance to pause for that person to really realize, wait a second, they're going to share with me something that's truly amazing, right? So that stillness, it's almost like the water in a reservoir, that still water before the dam is lifted, and then the power of the water coming gushing through. That's what the stillness is about. It's not about being a frozen lake. It's like being a huge reservoir with all this water ready to be unleashed. The next E is for equanimity. And by equanimity, engaged means engaged. And for engaged, I like to think about gears, right? So if you imagine you have 2 gears, and let's say you're here and everyone else is here, and you're not connected. So you're turning as your gear, and they're turning, but the 2 have nothing to do with each other, right? So you're not engaged. So what people really want and what really helps things get done is if you move to engage gears with the other person, right? So now that you're turning, they turn. And guess what? When they turn, you turn as well. So if they are experiencing something or have feedback, it's impacting you, and what you're doing helps and impacts them, right? So that engagement is so key, right? Like the stereotype is of the clueless military leader who's just about themselves and they don't care about the troops. So people don't really follow their orders in a meaningful way. They just do what they do to not get court-martialed or, in our case, fired, right? So being an engaged leader really makes people feel like, wow, this person, we should put them in charge. We should give them more responsibility because they really know how to stay connected with people. And the last one, C, is kind of like the go-to one that's pretty obvious to people. If you're going to inspire confidence, you should have confidence yourself. But I'm here to tell you that just having confidence in and of itself is not enough to have executive presence. You need all these states of being in order to inspire confidence. Because if you're just confident and you're not proactive, you're not resolute, you don't have equanimity, you don't have stillness, and you're not engaged, the confidence is going to come off as something else, right? It's not really going to come off as like, wow, we really want this person to lead. Now, this is the definition of confidence that I discovered recently that I just love because it's so powerful. And this definition is: confidence is the purity of action produced by a mind free of doubt. Right? I mean, that's just beautiful. Purity of action. You just know what to do, produced by a mind free of doubt. Right? It doesn't mean you're always going to be right. It doesn't even mean that you're the best expert for the job or have the best training, but it means in execution, in the way you move about things, you're giving yourself and the team the best chance to succeed. So that's why confidence is such a crucial part. And I think of confidence not as something that enhances your other skills. Confidence is a skill in and of itself, especially when it comes to executive presence, which is about inspiring people's confidence in you. So those are the 6 degrees of executive presence. And when you start to feel those and operate according to those, it changes the way people perceive you. And the actions, the doings, come naturally out of that, right? So you have the presence first, and then from there, the actions flow. So let's assume you have executive presence. Congratulations. You have all of these: proactive, resolute, equanimity, stillness, engaged, and confidence. How do you deploy it? What do you do with it? And I'd like to thank Kim Faison, who sort of brought up this topic. And it wasn't something that I was thinking of specifically for this presentation, but as soon as she asked the question, I started thinking more about it. And I was like, wow, we really have to address this. So thanks so much, Kim, for adding that to the mix. So executive presence has one really important limitation. Yeah. So would anyone like to guess in the chat, what is the limitation of executive presence, right? And there's a clue. The limitation is not in the executive part. The limitation is in the presence part. So what is a limitation, right? A natural limitation of executive presence, right? What can it do? Intimidation, nerves, opportunities. Yep. What else? Always look for the answers. Yep. Self-doubt. Yep. Need opportunity. Yep. All right. Okay. Great answers. So, Mara, my former colleague and still colleague in ITS Global, touched upon. These are all good answers, but touched upon the point that I want to drive home right now, which is an important limitation of executive presence, is you have to be present for it to work, right? You could be amazing, right? You could have the best executive presence, but if you're in a cave, right, and no one gets to witness it and feel it, well, how good is that for you, right? The people in the cave know you're great, but nobody else does, right? So that's one thing I think is really important. As you start to develop executive presence, it's not just about having executive presence in a very small box. Like, I come into work, I work with my team, they think I have great executive presence, but no one else knows me. Why not? The reason they don't know is because you're only operating in that very small sphere, right? So the metaphor I like to use is you could be the best fisherman on a really small pond, and it's comfortable, and you know exactly where all the best places are to fish, and all the local people know you and like you, and they're like, yeah, you know, this person's so great, right? And that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I would say is that doesn't give you the maximum use of your executive presence. Now, if, and this is if, it's not a requirement, but if you want to do more with your executive presence, right, then you're going to have to get out of the pond, right? You're going to have to go out onto the ocean where it's not as comfortable, right? Maybe you don't know where all the best spots are. Maybe there's a lot more competition. Maybe it's, you get a little bit seasick and it's very anxiety producing. Well, that is part of what is necessary to get in front of others to truly make the most of your executive presence. So you can be, the best in a very small world, or you can start to become the best in a much bigger world. However, those are two very different things. So what I always tell people is there's no right or wrong in what you want to do with your career, your timing. It's very kind of arrogant and presumptuous for anyone to tell someone else what they should be doing, even your parents, right? What I would say is understand what your choices are and then choose, and then do that choice, and when it's time to make a different choice, do the other choice. But fully understand the implications of the choice. So do not be sitting at the pond thinking, wow, how come my executive presence isn't doing more, when you refuse to leave the pond, right? You refuse to raise your hand. You refuse to take risks. You refuse to do more. You refuse to let other people, maybe outside your group, in the company, maybe in the industry, maybe in the world, know the value that you have and the executive presence that you have. All right, great. So let's just take a few moments and please share in the chat. How can you make the most of the executive presence you have? Because I know a lot of people on the call, they have it already. They're just looking to do better or do more with it and understand it better. So what are some things you can do to make more? Let's see. Mentoring? Yeah, thanks, Gail. Definitely. What else? What else can you do to make the most? You have this great gift. How can you leverage it? Relationship building. Help the team. Yes, sort of clear the pathways for others. Thank you, Anna. Brittany, raise your hand for projects. Exactly. Engage more. Yeah, absolutely. Communicate your achievements. Thanks, Mara. Exactly. Yep. Ask for feedback. Tough one. Thanks, Kosh. Yeah, definitely. All right. Excellent. So you start to see that it's not enough just to have something. You have to own it. You have to build it. Thank you, Billy. You have to leverage it. You really have to make the most of what I consider is kind of a gift, right? Because you are helping lead and you're making people feel confident that you got this, that you have something handled. So definitely, as you start to develop your executive presence, don't forget this very important piece. How do I make the most of it, right? Am I really doing everything I can to leverage this? And remember that all-important limitation. Presence requires you to be in front of people. And I don't mean physically, it can also be virtually, but it requires you to be traveling in various circles to get in front of people, whether it's your community, whether it's your church, synagogue, mosque, your family, wherever, right? We don't turn on executive presence when we open the door, or turn on our laptop now and then turn it off when we shut down our laptop, right? It should be there all the time. It should be leveraged all the time for the benefit of others because you got it. So you might as well make the best use of it. Okay. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the presentation. And thanks so much, Sharda. As we were coming up with sort of the content for this, she really challenged me and said, what about executive presence for underrepresented professionals, right? Like, is there a difference, right? And I had never thought about that. And it's kind of funny because, I'm Asian, I'm an underrepresented professional, but like I hadn't really thought about it for myself. I was like, yeah, that's a really good question, right? Like what are any particular issues or things that will make a difference for underrepresented professionals? And why does it matter in terms of leadership that you're an underrepresented professional, right? Why do you think it matters? Now, I'm going to tell you something that no one else will tell you. I'm going to tell it to you straight, right? This is why it matters that you're an underrepresented professional. And the word is anomalous, right? It's because in that role of being an executive, you, as an underrepresented professional, whether it's your gender, race, sexual preference, whatever, you are anomalous, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? So anomalous means inconsistent with or deviating from what is usual, normal, or expected. So to shorthand, I would just say irregular or unusual, right? Not in a bad way, not like a irregular pair of jeans or something, but it's not like what people expect, right? And I'll give you an example to drive this home. Let's say you have 99 directors, right? The first 99 movies that are ever made were made by people who look exactly like Martin Scorsese, right? They're kind of short, a little bit squat, graying hair. Every single movie ever made since the beginning of time has been made by Martin Scorsese or one of his cousins or brothers or someone who happens to look like him. Now you are the 100th, potential 100th director, and you're pitching your idea to the studios. Unfortunately for you, you are tall and thin, right? You're more like Eddie Redmayne or Nicole Kidman, right? And you go in and you're like, this is my idea from the movie. I went to film school. And then people are just like, yeah, sorry, I don't know what it is, but I just don't think this is going to work. Like, I don't think you have what it takes to direct our next feature film. We're not going to bet a lot of money on you. I'm not going to say it, but really they're going to pick the next Scorsese, right? They're going to pick the one that they are accustomed to choosing because that is what has come before. So there's two obstacles that this creates. One, the obstacle is with the crowd, right? So it's with the people who are choosing, the people who get to choose who gets to move up, right? So there's a problem of perception, right, for them, right? And then there's also a problem with you. Maybe you don't even take that meeting because you're like, man, I'm nothing like Scorsese. There's no way I could direct a film even half as good. So now it becomes a problem with you and your own confidence because you don't have any role models that look like Eddie Redmayne or Nicole Kidman who have done it before and say, well, of course I can do it, right? So that becomes a big obstacle. So what are some things we can do to overcome that? So that's kind of the problem. But what are some solutions we can do to overcome this challenge? So I like to call these the ABCs of executive presence for underrepresented professionals. So the first thing I would say is allies, right? So imagine you go into a room to present and the people in there are like super supportive of you, right? Like the partner there is saying, yeah, everyone listen to Joe. He's got some great things to say. And then now everyone else is like, wow, all right, going to listen to this guy. Versus you go in and the partner is just rolling their eyes or they're not paying attention. They're on the call, like while you're presenting. How is that going to go for you, right? Because people tend to follow other people's lead and take cues, especially from people who are also leaders and have executive presence. So what I like to tell people is don't go in cold, not knowing what's going to happen. Develop those relationships, share and get people on your side before you're in the big show and have to present and show your executive presence. Remember these three words, stack the deck, right? Don't go in there hoping, wishing, don't gamble on your career. Stack the deck, right? Get to know the people who will really be your strongest advocates, convince them, and convince the people who won't be your advocates. Find that person, work on them, just convince them, right? Create that relationship, that trust. So now they turn from your biggest sort of naysayer into your biggest advocate. And I would say sometimes that's even more powerful than someone who would have supported you already. So remember, stack the deck. And the second point I'll make on this is numbers really, really matter. So they did a study, I provided the link down here below, in the Atlantic, there's sort of a magical number that they've noticed in studies of 25%. So when they introduce like a minority type opinion into something, that basically when less than 25% of people are doing that, it's like nothing, right? Like there's no acceptance of that minority position, but something magical happens around 25%. And it's different depending on the situation, so that number may move up and down. But there comes a point where that threshold is reached, and then all of a sudden it flips. And then the minority position or opinion becomes the majority position, right? But it has to reach that critical mass because people are not comfortable just being the first one and going out on a limb, right? And just saying, okay, yeah, I think that's normal just because you say it's normal, right? So those numbers really matter. So the more support you can have in a situation where you are anomalous and everyone's like, yeah, of course they're going to do a great job, that will really help you. So remember, stack the deck. Next, Bravo. I love this concept. When I learned about it fairly recently, there is this, I think he's a Scottish chess grandmaster, Jonathan Rowson, I can never say his name correctly. And he had this great email exchange with someone where he said, if you want to be a chess champion, you will fail, right? Because when you want something, all you see is the gap, right? You see all the reasons why you don't have it and all the obstacles. And frankly, you fail because you typically get tripped up on one of those obstacles along the way and you give up, right? We've all experienced that just with New Year's resolutions or, you know, sort of, okay, I'm going to change, and then you end up failing, right? So we've all experienced that in life. It's nothing new. When you choose something, it's a totally different ballgame, right? When you choose, this is who I am, this is who I'm becoming, then it's almost like you don't have a choice. Everything you do, the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you conduct yourself, the way you think, comes from the perspective of that thing which you have chosen to become, right? It's very powerful, right? It's the difference between saying, I would love to be the CEO someday, to saying, you know what, I am a CEO, right? And then just operate until you get there, as if do all the CEO type things, right? They always say, you know, you won't get a position until people can see you in that position, right? So you don't wait to be tapped on the shoulder and now go. You start doing all the things that are expected. You're already doing it ahead of time. So very powerful. So I don't ever want to hear you say, I want more executive presence, right? You have to choose it. You have to say, I have more executive presence. I have the most executive presence of most people I know. I have it. And then you'll start conducting yourself accordingly. The last of the ABCs of executive presence is the code of authenticity. And thanks to my colleague Luis Rosado, who brought this one up and kind of challenged me to think about this. What happens when you're an underrepresented professional, right? We hear all this talk about, you know, be authentic, be your authentic self. It's powerful. And don't get me wrong, I love Brene Brown. Her stuff is so powerful and so spot on with regards to vulnerability, shame, authenticity. Read all her stuff. It's tremendous. But there's a challenge, right? Like sometimes you go to implement it and you try to be authentic and it totally backfires on you. And people are like, we didn't mean for you to be that authentic, right? And then as an underrepresented professional, you start to think, well, are some authenticities valued higher than others? I'm not allowed to be authentic unless I'm authentic in a way that makes you comfortable. And that's not really a great place to be. And it's easy to fall into that line of thinking. But I'm here to share with you that that's not what's going on, right? There's actually a very important piece that's missing that I'd like to share with you. And that's what I call the authenticity seesaw, right? So authenticity doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want, say whatever you want, be however you want, and everyone should accept it and like you, right? That's not the way authenticity works. It's never worked that way. It never will work that way. It doesn't matter how many books or courses they teach on authenticity. That is not reality. So what is really going on? What's going on is when you are disconnected from people, your authenticity is a liability, right? Think about people who do things that annoy you, right? But then let's say you have a shift in the relationship, and then now you're much closer to them, or maybe you get married or something, or become significant others, and now that same thing which annoyed you becomes so endearing. Oh, it's so cute the way you laugh now. I can't believe that used to bother me before. What happened, right? That person's being equally authentic, but you, in the way you receive it, has been very different. And this is why. Because now you have connection, right? So it's not just that you get to do whatever you want with disregard to the connection. You have to have a strong connection with the person first to maximize the impact of the authenticity. When you're disconnected, your authenticity will be a liability. When you're connected, your authenticity becomes an asset, right? So that's a really important principle I think people miss, right? They think, oh, I can just do whatever I want and say whatever I want and people should like me. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to have that foundation of connection and that safety. And why wouldn't you want that, right? Like, why would you want to be authentic with someone that you're not connected to, right? I mean, that just seems a little bit sort of like it's too soon for you to share that, right? You should start to reveal those layers of yourself as you build up trust and connection with people. So I want you to remember that that is the key for your authenticity to really have its full power. So the way I like to think of it is full connection powers full authenticity. Okay, so in just a moment we'll head to Q&A. So what have we learned today? All right, we've learned the definition of executive presence, which is it's the ability to inspire confidence that you can lead well in a given situation. We've gone over the 6 degrees or the states of being of executive presence that really lead people to feel that way about you: proactive, resolute, equanimity, stillness, engaged, and the most obvious one, confidence, but not the most important one. We've talked about an important limitation of executive presence, which is it only works in the areas you're present, right? So in order to maximize that, you need to be present in more places. And then we wrapped up talking about this really important issue, which is executive presence for underrepresented professionals. What can you do when you do not resemble the people who are the executives, when you do not match the expectations? And I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that's life, right? If there are 99, Scorseses that come before you, that's just what is. Like, you have to deal with reality, right? So what can you do? And the 3 things you can do, the ABCs of executive presence: you need allies, right? 25% is a good number. Stack the deck. Don't go in there hoping, praying, wishing that people will be on your side. No. Put your finger on the scale. Stack the deck before you get in there. 2, bravo, right? You are already someone with great executive presence. Choose to be that person. Don't want it or need it, because you'll never get there. You'll always see the gaps, and the gaps will trip you up. And finally, the code of authenticity, right? It's a code, and to crack the code, it's not just about being your most authentic self. You have to have connection. Okay. So we're going to move to Q&A. Please type your question in the chat box. What are your questions related to challenges you have or are having with improving your executive presence? Okay, so a question was asked about stillness versus calmness. I think I saw that before. Is stillness comparable to calmness. What I would say about that is when you have to be calm in order to have stillness. Calm could also be part of equanimity, right? So I would call calm maybe a little bit closer to equanimity. When stressful things happen, you stay calm and you keep it together. But you definitely also, calmness helps with that stillness and just not moving until there's a reason to move. Great. So thanks for that question on stillness versus calmness. What else do we have? If there's someone who is stuck, how do you inspire them to realize that they may need to work on executive presence? If there's someone who is stuck, how do you inspire them to realize that they may need to work on executive presence? You know, that's a good question, and that's something I've been thinking about a lot. It even makes it into the book, in that a lot of times people will tell you that you know, your managers will tell you, like, you need to do this or you need to do that, and what they really mean is you need to work on your executive presence. But what they end up telling you is more like specifics, like I don't know, you need to work on your public speaking or something like that. But that's not really what they mean. What they really mean is you need to work on your executive presence. And I think the best way to handle that is just have a conversation about what executive presence is and why it's important. And you know, not even just say, like, you know, you need it, but just to say, hey, let's talk about this, and I want to get your thoughts on this, and have them start to understand the role that it can play in their career and success. And hopefully that will knock some things loose. We have a question from Billy. Now in this work from home environment, how do you overcome the difficulty of creating a presence? Great question. I think Shetty had that question as well. So believe it or not, there's presence virtually as well, right? Like, as I'm giving this presentation, if I'm not looking into the camera, if I'm constantly like reading notes, what are your questions related to challenges you have, I lose my presence, right? So presence primarily is about being there and engaged, and for lack of a better description, you know, like being there, present in the moment, right? Because when you're not, people feel that. There's like an energy between you and every person, and they can feel it. And, you know, it's like when you're giving a presentation or you're talking and someone's like, you know, typing on their phone beneath the table, right? As if you can't feel that or see that, right? So it's really about being present during that meeting. It's about participating and leading. And here's the great thing about the 6 degrees of executive presence. They're not a prescription of what you need to do. They're a prescription of how to be, right? The way to think about how you move through life and your situations. And when you start to own that and be that, a magical thing happens. The things that you're supposed to do just come out, right? I'm never going to hand you a list of top 5, 10 things that you should do to be a better leader or have executive presence. It's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous, right? You have to understand who you need to be, and then each situation will dictate the proper actions. And the same thing goes for sort of video. Now, of course, it's a lot harder because you're not in front of people, but guess what? You're on a level playing field. And I would say it's an advantage, right? Because I remember times where I worked somewhere and I was in headquarters and I was on the same floor as the CEO, the general counsel, the chief financial officer. I had a real advantage by my physical presence. You know, I run into the CEO in the bathroom and like chat him up, right? But if you work in the Pennsylvania office or the Florida office, you don't have that opportunity. Well, guess what? We are all on a level playing field now, right? You have just as much ability virtually to connect with someone as anyone else. And people who were in the office with that individual you want to connect with are no longer. So I actually see it as an advantage, not as a disadvantage, that we're virtual in terms of connecting for executive presence. So thanks for that question, Billy and Shetty. Mara, how do you work around asking for more opportunities to get in front of leaders while being virtual? Yeah, great one. I mean, I think for that, a lot of it's asking, and a lot of it's just kind of creating your own opportunities, right? When you are engaged and connected, you start to see what the needs are and you start to propose things. And the way I like to think of it is, it's more than three strikes are out. Sometimes sometimes it's like the 10th time or the 20th time that you ask for the thing and then you get the opportunity. But that's what matters. Not that you asked 19 times before, but that you got the 20th opportunity. Because if you stop asking, if you stop driving towards it, then guess what? Poof, you never get that opportunity. It doesn't exist. So that's what I would say, Mara. Really great question. Let's see. All right, so I think we have time for just one more question, and then I'll hand it back to Sharda to close before we go to what I'm most excited about, which is our sharing session, optional session after. So any last questions?
Joe, there's a question about from Leslie. I can identify independently maybe 3 degrees of executive presence. How would you recommend improving in other areas?
Improving in the other areas like that are not those 3?
Yeah. She has not mentioned the 3 degrees, but I think she's asking how she can improve in other areas.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe talk about that offline. I don't think it's something I can answer in like the minute or two that we have left. So happy to chat with you about it, and would definitely need some more information. But there's definitely things you can do and practice to start to internalize those things. So it's definitely possible, and I think it's great that you're thinking about that and identifying that.
Yeah. And we have one more question from Janine, which we can take offline. She's asking about what's your advice for intern associates, senior associates who are in the early stages of career development? How can they start to develop executive presence early on in their careers, especially in a virtual environment? That's a great question too. And Joe, we can take that offline.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so I'll hand it back to you, Sharda, to close the webinar portion.
Sounds good. Joe, can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure. Okay, should be up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joe. This was really, really engaging. I personally loved this session. It not only helped me understand how to do executive presence, but also understand what other aspects are there. So it was really helpful to me, and I hope everyone learned a lot as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joe, and this was awesome.
Bye.
I personally learned a lot, so thank you so much.